Dr. Moffet, thanks so much for coming on the Grow Ortho podcast.
Hey, Luke, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be back.
Absolutely. For those listening, watching, maybe they don't know who you are, they haven't read your book. Tell us who you are and what you do.
Yeah, hi, I'm Dr. David Moffet. I'm a retired dentist. I was a dentist for 35 years down in Australia, if you're wondering where my accent is from, and I had my own practice for 28 of those years. And after I sold it, I started working for a friend, but I developed arthritis in my hands at that same time. And so 2017, I chose to clinically retire myself. I just couldn't do the dentistry that I was enjoying doing on the patients, and it was hurting me. And so I had already started transitioning, because after selling, people were coming to me and saying, David, how did you have a good practice? What did you do? Can you have a look at my practice, at their practice? And so practice management seemed like a way of giving back to the profession. I write for an Australian publication, Australasian Dental Practice magazine. As you know, Luke, I wrote this book, which is still a first off Amazon bestseller for 37 months in a row in its category. Even Howard Ferran asked me how I did that. I don't know. I just told it as it was.
What led you to write that book?
A friend of mine who's not a dentist, had written a book, and I just reached out to him. He's a sales guy. And I said, wow, tell me about your book. And the first thing he said to me was, David, you can do this. You've got a book in you, easy. And so we both used a company called Advantage out of South Carolina, where you actually talk your book. So, you set your chapters, and then they interview you and they put the book together. Because to write a book in a book format that keeps it interesting and not just make it War and Peace is difficult. It's a challenge. And so once the book is spoken, then they pass it to you to edit it, and you spend the exact same amount of time in editing it as you did in speaking it. I wanted it to be a story of my journey through dentistry, of practice ownership and into coaching. So it's very conversational, my book. It's not like, oh, here's the 10 steps to do this and the 5 steps to do that. But at the end of every chapter, if you've gone through with a highlight pen and a ballpoint pen, you can probably find somewhere between 60 and 100 tips on practice management in that book per chapter.
You had tracked every single touch point for a new patient, and you had written a process for your team for every single touch point. Am I remembering this correctly?
That was the principle of creating the ultimate patient experience, was that we wanted our practice to be different. So how is our practice different? It looks at the journey of the patient and what the patient sees and experiences, not what we see and experience for the patient. When we broke down that in a general dental practice, patients come for 3 reasons. They either come for a consultation, they come for a hygiene visit, or they come for some form of treatment. There are different steps and stages depending on which of those 3 reasons they come for. Some of the stages are identical. And so we broke it down, and then we looked at it from the patient's point of view. But once we had the steps, what I then did was I got my team to work out what they did that was what every practice does, what they did which we believe other practices didn't do but should do, what were our above and beyond opportunities, which was premeditated list of things that would wow a patient at any step, that we could just pull an arrow from our quiver and use, and the patient would think it was random, but we knew that it was our opportunity to do that. And also, what were our service defects that could happen at each of those steps as well, and how did we fix those defects? What were our service recovery processes, which were actually, sometimes our service recovery was better than if we hadn't had the defect in the first place. But knowing all these things and getting the team to put that together, and getting them to put it together on an individual basis. So one dental assistant would do one stage, and then another dental assistant would do another stage. So they did them independently. And in that process, when they brought it to the team meeting, the other dental assistant would go, I didn't know you were doing that in your room. And the front office would say, I didn't know you guys were doing that down the back. And we can we can build on that. We can use that. If we knew you were doing that, we could actually make our job easier. That helped us. And so the putting together of the processes was really a fun experience for the team. And that's what we then started teaching our clients, was how to do that so that your team own the manual, rather than being the gospel according to Moffet or the gospel according to some other guru. We're going to implement this guy, and then we're going to implement. This is ours, and every team has that. So when somebody comes to work there, they say, "Here's our manual. This is what we've put together. Have a read of it." The team has power from being part of that process, and it was fun for them. Like some of our team meetings, team members were crying tears of laughter at some of the suggestions they were coming up with. Really left field sort of suggestions for customer service, which was like, wow, that is really good. Let's use that, and that really set us apart. Because if we don't set our practices apart, the only way our patients are going to choose us is on price.
Right.
We actually funnel them into the price. If we don't give them a better experience, we just funnel them into the price.
And what are some of the things that you guys saw that were the biggest difference makers in terms of experience?
When we broke down the ultimate patient experience into what I call the 5 building blocks of the patient journey through the practice. So the building block number 1 is they connect with the practice. They either phone or text or go to an online booking. That's that process. The second is what happens when they arrive. The third is what happens between arrival and going to the treatment room. The fourth is what happens in the treatment room. And the fifth is what happens after the treatment room. And then from that, we broke down each of the steps in those 5 building blocks. The 2 most forgotten building blocks in any dental practice are building block number 2 and building block number 3. The arrival process and what happens while they're waiting to be taken to the treatment room. And sometimes you can get a patient who is all excited about coming to you. They've made a good booking, but when they get there, they're kind of parked. Take a seat, won't be too long. My hairdresser used to say that. Just take a seat, won't be too long. And I go, geez, that's what we're saying. We got to do better than that. So how do we up that greeting? How do we then employed a concierge who help people to converse with each other everybody's there waiting to see the hygienist or another associate dentist. So what do you in fact, one of my patients was really good at that role. She goes, "What are you having done? How long have you been coming here?" And that then saves the patient from falling down that deep chasm of despair while they wait. And they're watching the clock, why are they taking so long? When they've gone down into that chasm of despair and then they come to the treatment room, the dentist and the dental assistant have to get them back up to an emotional high before they present more treatment options to them. And so if we can keep them at this high or this level of pleasantry, it makes the job for the dentist much easier. It's the old Wizard of Oz story. And I experienced this at an ophthalmic surgeon. By the time I met the doctor, I was already sure that this was the place for me, because everybody had been so nice along the way. And the Wizard of Oz is exactly the same. By the time Dorothy meets the wizard, he's the only one who's going to get her back to Kansas. Nobody else. She's so focused on getting to meet him, she doesn't care who he is. In fact, she doesn't realize he's just that little old man behind the curtain, because he's going to get her back to Kansas. And so that's what the dentist really has to do, is remove themselves from being almighty, I've got the biggest degree in the place, you pay attention to me, to our team are so good, they'll look after you before you come in to see me and after you've seen me and before you go home. Their visit might be 3 times as long as the treatment time, but they love it because they're talking to friends and they have an emotional connection with everybody who works there.
So one of the things you brought up is controlling the state, somebody's state. So obviously, somebody could be fearful coming to the dentist. This is going to be painful. I would imagine a lot of people maybe think about canceling their appointment leading up to it, a day, same day, 2 days before, or when they come in, it's not a warm greeting and the guard goes up. And so there's things that you can do for that guard to come down and you to enhance the person's state. You called it, being pleasant. I think that's key in any type of customer service, feeling good, making sure that the customer feels good and knows they're in the right place. And so many, it sounds so simple, but so many businesses miss this.
It's so easy to do, but it's easy not to do. And you're right, when they miss it or they neglect to think that when a patient arrives, how has their day been before they get there? Have they had a pleasant day? Have they had a traumatic day? Are they a minute late because they got held up at work just as they were walking out the door, or the traffic was bad? All these sorts of things that we blame the patient, like a headmaster, don't do it again. We don't want the patient to ever feel like they're an interruption to anything else. We want the patient to feel like we've been waiting for their phone call, for them to walk in the door all day. We've been looking forward to seeing them. And in fact, we're at an advantage at a dental practice because we know the names of everybody who's coming in and when they're due.
Mm-hmm.
So we can greet them, especially if it's a one-person or a two-person practice. We've got a fair idea that the next man or woman who walks in is probably Bob or Jenny who's in our book.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can greet them. So, hey, Jenny, how are you? Even a new patient. Hi, you must be Mrs. Smith. My name's Jane. I spoke to you on the phone. Welcome to Active Dental. So much different to, ding, I'm here for my appointment. What's your name? Well, you've got my name there.
Yeah. In terms of customer service, making the patient feel good, welcome, every interaction is a wow interaction. How important is this practically to have a growing practice?
There are certain things that we were doing for our patients and in follow-up and in TLC as well, which were our point of difference. Every time a patient had a crown or a traumatic procedure, they're called the next day to see how they're going. I've got clients who had stopped calling patients and say, how's that crown feel? It's a $2,000 investment. It's the most expensive thing they're going to buy. We know it feels different because it's just got the surface tension of porcelain is different to the surface tension of enamel. So I remember my first crown that I got, I couldn't stop putting my tongue on it. So when do we call them to make sure that everything's going okay? Do we call them when they're at home? No, we'll call them at work because they'll get off the phone. You wouldn't believe that was my dentist just ringing to check how my crown is, and everybody else in the office goes, my dentist doesn't do that. Who's your dentist? So it's using opportunity to make an impression on another circle of influence as well. Again, coming back to, I used to go to our local Chamber of Commerce meetings to meet prospective patients. And it became known. I was the only dentist there, 50 dentists in my town. Nobody else went to these. And so it became known when somebody moved in to the city for business, they say, where's the best place to go to the dentist? And they say, oh, you've got to go to Active Dental. Look, it's going to cost you a little bit more, but it's worth it. How good an endorsement is that? And because that's the perception that if you do charge a little bit more, you must be better because you're able to justify that.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you'd be charging less to try and attract people who are based on price and nothing else. We've really got to be mindful that when somebody phones, that we find out who we're talking to, first of all, and then answer their questions. Not answer their questions and then find out that we've spoken to them as if they're a new patient and they're actually an existing patient. And it's so easy. And not put them on hold because you're busy without even finding out who they are and what they're calling about. Like, do you mind if I put you on hold for a minute? I call dental practices every day and I get that. And they don't tell me who they are. Mm-hmm. And then when they come back, they don't tell me who they are. Every time when I'm put on hold, every time it's that sometimes they don't even say, oh, thank you for waiting. Thank you for being on hold. Sometimes I ask them if they ever ring up and listen to their on-hold message. Sometimes it's psychological trauma, mm-hmm. those bells, the repeating messages. Again, point of difference. How do we make it a point of difference? Ask them who they are. You might, look, I'm just with another patient at the moment. Would it be okay if I called you back in 10 minutes? Much better than being on hold.
Totally. And getting someone's information, basic information, name, phone number in case the call drops, that way you can address them, call them back, text them, etc. I hate being put on hold for long periods of times. I think everybody does. And I also don't like having a call tree. For a new patient calling and they're being put through press 1 for this, 2 for this, 3 for this. I just want to talk to somebody. Staffing your front desk, or if it's a bigger practice, a patient care center, call center, to be able to answer the call quickly, it pays dividends.
It does, and you're right with that. The only time I got into a problem, I press 1 for new patient, and I found that I was in an off-site office, and I actually wanted to talk to the dentist. So now when I call a practice, I always press 2 for existing patient, and I know that there's a 99% chance that goes straight to the front desk in that location. Even the other day, I called a practice where it was one of 6, and in different cities. I got someone speaking with an accent from overseas, and I asked a couple of questions. She said, "Oh yeah, I'm here in this practice," and then she'd say, "I'll forward a note to the doctor." And so she was actually telling me that by what she was actioning, that she wasn't actually in the practice, even though she had said she was in the practice. Because the dentist, I know, he does a couple of days in one location, and it takes him a while, 2 or 3 weeks, to rotate through the 6 practices that he owns. So anyway, it can easily be found out if you're faking it.
It's interesting too, because a lot of people are starting to talk about AI phone calls. While AI can be pretty neat, I don't think it's anywhere near the point of a human in live conversation. And so it'll be interesting to see personally, if a robot's on the other line, I'm going to hang up and call your competitor because I don't want to talk to a robot. Now, maybe when it's very sophisticated, which is a couple years, it's a different story. But I think that'll be interesting too, because more and more people will be implementing AI call robots to field phone calls.
I'm hearing it now in some practices where you get an AI voice created that says, in a robotic way, "We value your call. Please wait, please hold, and one of our friendly team members will be answering the phone." And you go, "Well, this is not a friendly robot. I know you're a robot.
Yeah.
Why don't you just have a friendly team member there in the first place?"
Yeah. You were mentioning that your wife also works with you and does front desk coaching. How overlooked is coaching the people on the phones in dental practices?
Oh, look, it's huge and it's simple. Down here, and we work a little in the US as well in the same manner. We have access to recordings of incoming phone calls because it's the only way to coach somebody. You can lecture them, you can give them a book, we've got an audio course, but we're not hearing exactly what's happening. It's kind of like having piano lessons and never putting your fingers on the keyboard. How does a teacher know how you're playing? Like my dad, when he was doing art classes, his art teacher said, "You drew this sitting down." It was a sketch, and my dad said, "Yeah, how did you know?" He said, "Because your pressure is different than if you were standing and drawing it." We've got to be able to listen, and when we listen to teams, because the team member introduces themselves, so we know who it is. Because of the length, we're looking for calls that are too long or calls that are too short. And usually calls that are too long are people being put on hold, which is even worse. But we're listening to live calls and live interactions, and we're able to help each team member with their weaknesses and also with their strengths, so that we're not just telling them, "Here are the ABCs of answering the phone." We're actually saying, "Well, on this call, here's what happened." And usually it's answering the phone is a recipe. Okay, and if you're baking a cake, you can't put the icing on and then throw it in the oven. It doesn't work that way. You got to do things in an order. And so I'd already mentioned to you, you've got to find out first of all, who am I talking to, and when was the last time they were in our practice. All right, and I didn't say, "Have you been here before?" because that's an insult. If they say, "You haven't been in there," I paid for his new car, I paid for his overseas trip, I paid for that office. How best to insult somebody by not realizing who they are. So when were you last in to see Dr. Moffet? We work with the individual team members to help them, and usually when they end up in a rabbit hole, it's because they've gotten things out of order and they just haven't followed our 8-point checklist. And you've got to stick to that. But I can give them an 8-point checklist, but do people stick to it? Not all the time. And do some experienced staff get lazy and sloppy? The best thing is that no matter how busy the practice is and how productive the practice is, we find when we start listening to the phone calls, we can make that practice more productive because they haven't had that coaching of their front office team on the phone. So we've just a new client has come to us, $2.5 million practice. And the coach, 3 people answering the phone, all different greetings. And we find that And we say, how are your greetings? How come your greetings? Oh, we've never been coached on that. What about your processes in the back? Well, they're not consistent either. And so it's consistency as well. That when you go to, is it the Four Seasons?
Mm-hmm.
When it's time for your room key, as you've checked in, they'll walk around and hand it to you.
Mm-hmm.
That's a thought out process. They'll even walk you over to the elevators. That's a thought out process. Why is that thought out? Because it's different to anywhere else. The best thing that I ever heard in my office was I was just walking through the client lounge and I heard a new patient saying to my wife, who was then the concierge in the practice, saying, I can't believe how different this is from what I expected. It's so different from any other business I've been in. You guys really have nailed it. And they hadn't even met me. They didn't even know who I was. And again, back to that Wizard of Oz analogy, that if the team is so professional, they love it in terms of and caring. And so, that was how I hired my wife to come and work for me. She was, when we met, she was studying to be a school teacher. Then she was a school teacher. She ended up teaching kindergarten. The only way to get out of teaching kindergarten is to actually go on maternity leave. And so she had her own children and was on maternity leave. But then when our children were old enough to find their own way home from school, I said, you need to stop doing parents and citizens stuff at the school and come and work for me, because we need a concierge to stop people falling down that chasm. And so that's what she came and did. Sadly, on one Monday when she turned up after dropping the kids off to school, I said, we've got a little bit of a problem today. Both our receptionists are sick and you're going to have to answer the phone. She goes, well, how tough can that be? But she goes, hey, this is really difficult. And so, again, a lot of dentists decide that they're going to teach their staff how to answer the phone. The staff go, you've never answered the phone before, and all you're doing is telling me, make me more money, make me more money. So the third party is really powerful as well. We're hiring somebody who's a professional to help you guys be better at what you do. What's the end result for the team member as well? I don't know if it's the same in ortho, but in general dentistry, it's the end result is that if we allow cancellations and if we don't book enough patients in, we end up with spaces in our book, and to fill spaces in our book, we have to reactivate patients who have been allowed to cancel. And so the more you allow patients to cancel, the more of those people there are to do. And that's the worst thing a dentist can ever say. I think we should do some reactivation. Everyone starts going, I've got to clean the desk. I've got to go to the post office. Nobody wants to do that. So if you get better at getting people to keep their appointments and getting people to not cancel as much as they do, as easily as they do, you have less reactivation. And so it becomes a self-fulfilling cycle. The busier your book, the less people actually cancel in the first place. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, we're helping in general dentistry. We know that whatever goes on in here doesn't get better by itself. It doesn't fix itself. The decay doesn't go away. The wear doesn't go away. All that's, the pockets don't go away. It has to be treated. So every time we allow a patient to defer treatment, we're actually impacting on their health instead of in a negative way instead of a positive way. Patients think it's like cleaning the garage. Oh, it can wait. It's going to be the same in a month. It's going to be the same in 6 months. Stuff breaks. Stuff gets worse. So we've got to make sure that we're thinking about the patient, but we're also thinking about the flow and effect for us as employees and us as a business. If we're busy, and also if we've got people who want to move their appointment forward, we've got a perfect practice.
It's also interesting when you think about how consumers make purchasing decisions. I don't know if this is true, but I would imagine it's something close where people decide who they're going to do business with in the first 30 seconds of an interaction. It's more of a subconscious decision, but I think it really is true. If I look at the interactions I have within customer service, I think it goes back to what you brought up earlier, which is the state you help someone get in. And if you're causing them to get into a negative state, answering hello, no greeting, no energy in the tone, possibly being rude. I hear a lot of rude people on the call. Oh, it's another one of these types of patients, because maybe a question somebody asked and it prompts that response from the jaded team member that deals with hundreds of people, maybe a day. There's all these variables, but if you think about how that makes a patient feel. There's a lot of moments where we're hindering people from coming in, or they may go through the booking process, but then they hang up and call somebody else because of how they felt. All these things we don't think about and we don't see because a lot of times we don't stop and put ourselves in the patient's shoes. Well, what would I do? Well, how'd I behave when I was trying to fix my plumbing problem last week? We're reminded, oh, this is consumer behavior. It's interesting because when we're in the business working on, as like if we're talking to dentist, orthodontist, or a specialty oral surgeons, whatever, we don't zoom out and think about these things. I'll ask dentists, when's the last time you listened to a phone call? And they're like, never. Very rarely does one say, oh, well, I call the practice and act like a patient. Every now and then, let's say every 500 I talk to, one says that. But it's very lacking. And it's that entry point into the practice. And so I think it becomes a role that needs to be highly skilled and highly trained and incentivized, even because that's the gatekeeper. That's what is going to give you the opportunity to help people and then in return get paid for value and service.
Absolute truth, Luke. It's a tough job because ultimately when they're not incentivized, they get paid exactly the same whether they book somebody in or not.
Mm-hmm.
I have a client at the moment who's implementing a lot of systems, but I had to deconstruct some really bad systems that she had in her practice. So, trying to be everything to everybody. So they had one morning they opened up really early. They had a couple of nights they worked late, and so every day had different start end times. And I said, how can anybody? Your staff are coming by public transport. Sometimes they can't get there because there's no bus at that time in the morning, or they've got to leave before the last bus comes. You've got to create some consistency. But the one thing that she has that is really causing an issue at the moment is everybody gets to do a different role. So the receptionist one day is not the receptionist the next day. The dental assistant one day is not the dental assistant the next day. They rotate around between doctors and they rotate around between front and back.
Yeah.
And sure, that means everybody's multi-skilled, but there's no onus of I own the front desk and I'm responsible for making sure that everything is in place. So the thing at her front office is that at the end of the day, they'll go home and they say, I didn't have time to fill those gaps, because nobody gets in trouble for it because somebody else is stepping into that role the next day.
Mm-hmm.
And whereas as soon as an appointment gets cancelled and you end up with a space in today or tomorrow, that becomes the next priority. And if you say, I've got to go and sterilize instruments or we run out, buy more instruments. Mm-hmm. Because no point having clean instruments if you haven't got anybody to do any dentistry on.
Right.
The end result from every phone call, nobody ever calls a dental practice for fun. Nobody says, I've got half an hour to check out the prices of the dentists in this area. They don't do that. They call the dentist because they have a problem. And they've also called your dental practice because they feel that they've already done their homework. They've gone online. They've researched. They've read the reviews. They're already sold on you. Back in the days when I started practicing, it was brass plates, and dentists would run around measuring whether the brass plate, the letters were too big on their neighbours' signs. That's how nasty it was. But now we can actually prove ourselves beforehand. But we've got to match the perception that the caller is going to have from the marketing by who answers the phone. Ultimately, at the end of every phone call, we want that person to get off the phone saying, wow, that lady was really nice. I'm really looking forward to meeting her. That sounds like the practice that I've been looking for. And in fact, she said she was going to call me if there was a change in the books. I hope she does. I want to go there sooner. Those are the feelings that we want everybody to have when they get off the phone. Not, as you mentioned, sometimes they get off the phone and they go, ugh, I'm not going there. Let me call somebody else. They don't even ring and cancel. Mm-hmm. Like they go, they were so rude. I'm just going to make them pay. I'm going to make them waste their time. When we find that we've got cancellations happening or failing to attend on new patients, and we say, well, let's punish them. Let's make them pay me $100. And we'll be even nastier. Add a nasty thing. Deposits at restaurants were taken because, 5 friends are sitting around. They say one wants Mexican, one wants Thai, one wants Chinese, one wants Italian, one wants Indian food. So they make 5 bookings, and then on the night they say, all right, we'll go to this one. So the restaurants were really suffering because of that and online booking. So that's why they take deposits. But nobody makes 5 dental appointments.
No.
Yeah. They've already made their decision. And so I think taking a deposit, you don't need that. If your systems and your processes are customer oriented, people will get off the phone and say, that lady sounded so nice. I really am glad I called. She was so caring. She was friendly. She helped me with my problem, and she gave me hope.
100%.
Be friendly, help them solve their problem. That's why they're calling, find out what it is. And their problem isn't the price. The problem is what they're asking the price about. So just knowing that what to listen for, and using their name back to them as well, very important, Luke.
Totally. When we move on and we look at growth, let's say, you want to go from the average dental practice and be exceptional in terms of production and revenue. You've got your systems down. You've got the core team members. A lot of times I'm curious your thoughts. There's the doctor, and then there's everybody else. There's this flat org chart. And you even mentioned somebody who rotates roles. I've seen that too, where, we let this person do it and then this person do it. That creates a generalist rather than a specialist. So I'm curious what you see with what's needed in terms of leadership, an org chart, thinking about a team structure. This is what big companies are really good at. They've figured out, okay, we've got the top, the CEO, we need these leadership roles. Then we're going to have all these other roles that report up to these roles. And that way the organization flows properly. There's mentorship, there's growth opportunities. What do you see within dental practices that is causing that flat org chart, and maybe a different way of thinking in order to scale your organization?
It's tough because everybody's only got 24 hours in the day. So time utilization is important. And this is why the average dental practice stays average, in that the dentist starts doing things that they've actually paid other people to do, and they're doing them instead. So, the dumbest thing used to be that the dentist used to be assembling matrix bands, or the dentist would be mixing up impression material while the dental assistant stood there and watched him. The next dumb thing is, at the end of the appointment, the dentist takes the patient out, and instead of standing on the patient beside the patient and talking to the receptionist, the dentist goes and stands beside the receptionist. The patient's on the other side of the desk, so we create this 2 against 1. Whereas if we're standing with the patient, we're with the patient, and the patient feels like we're sharing them back to the receptionist. But then the dentist actually becomes the receptionist. So the receptionist is sitting there, and the receptionist knows what to do with the appointment book, and the dentist goes, oh, let's move this patient, let's put the patient there. All of a sudden, the receptionist's not getting up and going and treating the next patient. So this is why they fail financially. They also are sending an incorrect message to the patient. The other thing about dental reception areas is that 50 years ago, they had a glass barrier in there so that the patient coming out after having an extraction didn't spit blood on the receptionist. It rarely happens in dentistry these days. And so, in I think about 20 years ago, when we remodeled our practice, we made our reception area a place where there was just a tiny little upstand with a monitor. Every transaction was actually done as you are, at a desk across eye to eye. All right, and no barrier. So I say the first thing, that if you buy a dental practice and it's got an upstand there, you just get a chainsaw and you just cut that down thing off and make it a desk. And then it's like having a coffee. And so there's a relationship happening when people are eye to eye. A conversation starts happening. And often I used to find when we set that up, and they were in separate rooms, and the rooms had glass walls between them. So my 2 receptionists could see each other. When the phone rang, they could actually see each other. The patient sat back to back, and they'd look to see who was going to get the call if they were both with a patient. We didn't want it to feel like that. We wanted it to feel open. The other thing about having a glass door is that if the receptionist's on the phone, then somebody doesn't charge in with the patient coming out as well. And so we also had a little sign. If the receptionist on the phone, she had like a little card that was red, don't come in, or she had a little card that was green saying it's okay to bring the patient in while I'm on the phone. Again, just little signals. But creating that environment where people feel comfortable. Because we all know the scene from Coming to America, if we're old enough, the Eddie Murphy movie, the barbershop scene where everybody in the barbershop is listening to what's going on. And of course, we're concerned about patient privacy, but in dentistry, it's not about, we're not saying, they've got an infection on a part of their body, like at the doctor's surgery. It's just in the mouth. It's not really that bad. So, sometimes a patient will hear in a client lounge in an older practice will hear, oh, that lady's having Invisalign. I'm going to get Invisalign. Oh, let me, it's almost like a conversational, by the way, sale. And again, patients saying, oh, I'm getting this, I'm getting that. Dentistry is not about boils on backs and nasty things, really. It's about making people look better and making them feel better.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've got to bring that into our transactional side of dentistry. And the worst thing about dentistry is that it costs a lot. And so that if we don't spend time over the transactions, patients are kind of like out of the chair. It's like getting off a roller coaster ride. As quickly as you get off, there's somebody else gets on and off it goes. And you go, did I leave anything on the floor in that roller coaster? It's kind of like that. Sometimes that's in dentistry. It's kind of like I'm out in the street. I can't tell. I've got a numb face and I've got $1,000 missing from my wallet. What happened? So again, we want to make it that it's more than just about the dentistry. We want to make it about the relationship and the touch and feel, and that's really, really important.
Is there anything that you see and that you maybe coach on in regards to mindset from the top tier dentist? What separates the top tier versus the average type of practice? Is there mindset differences that are more common that you see maybe with the high performers top tier than the average?
Great question. I wish everybody asked me this, because the average dentist believes that if they were smart enough to become to get to dental school, and then are smart enough to get through dental school, they're smart enough to know everything that they have to do. And that's not the case. Anybody who plays tennis, anybody who plays golf, anybody who plays the piano will know that there's things that go on that are outside of your control. While you're functioning on the piano keys, you're more concerned about the process than the sound. And when you're swinging a golf club, you don't know where that golf club is behind you because you're watching the ball. Because if you take your eye off the ball, it takes your balance totally away. And same with tennis as well. Are you watching where you're going to hit the ball to, or are you watching the ball hit the racket? You're always watching where you're trusting that you're getting that hand in play. The top tier dentists understand that they only know so much, they can't do everything, and they need to get help. And the bottom tier dentists are the same guys who say, I'm going to do all my own financial advice because I don't like paying a commission to somebody else to tell me what to do. But really, you just got to pay somebody else to do it because you don't have the time to do the research thoroughly. And it's the same in with the top tier dentists. They understand that they need to delegate within their practice. They need to do what they do really well, but they need to take advice from somebody who has done it before or somebody who has helped somebody do it before. I like to think in sport, it's 50-50 as to whether, because you're a good player, you can actually be a good coach, or half the coaches were never good players, but they were really good at understanding the science of their sport, and they were able to empower players all the time in the process and create a process that is professional and winning. Really hard to do that when you're the mechanic underneath the car. You don't know what's going on in your office. It's the same in dentistry. You're focused on that mouth. You really don't know what's going on behind. You just hope that it's going on fine, and you want to make sure that it's going on as well as it can be. The big difference for me, Luke, and it's in my book. My practice was doing double the average, and I still had gaps in my book. And I'm going, what? I need help. And everybody's saying, Dave, you're going all right. You're doing double. Don't worry. And then I met a guy doing double what I was doing. And I'm going, and he worked in a lower socioeconomic area than mine. I thought, what's the difference? Difference was he had a coach. And so I then went and got a coach. My first coach was a disaster. We just weren't on the same page. But my second coach I stayed with for 6 years and tripled my practice in that 6 years by focusing on customer service. And so from that second coach, the next 15 years on, my practice went up in collections, went from $400,000 a year to $3.4 million a year, went up $3 million in 15 years in turnover. There was a three-chair practice when I started that process, and it was a 7-chair practice when I finished. It wasn't like we grew 15 times. We just did things better along the way. We ended up with more hygienists than dentists, which is meant that we had the customers there, the customer base, that trust in our business, our rent roll, as realtors call it.
So I'm hearing a few things. I think the first thing that a lot of people can relate to is ego. So letting go of the ego, which can be tough for high performers, business owners, not just dentists. But I do think there is something to going to school for so long and proving yourself and having to overanalyze things. Like that's kind of your job as a dentist, is you're being so cautious and analyzing everything to make sure that you get it right. But let going of that ego, especially when you're putting on your business hat, getting out of your way, allowing others to do what they do best, that will allow you to serve more people, function more efficiently. Another thing you mentioned, I'm glad you mentioned this, is getting a coach. So many people I talk to that are the top tier say the same thing. But then I hear some people say, well, that first coach was a disaster, so no more coaches. I think that is part of life, learning experiences. Just because one thing fails, especially if it's a person, don't write it off. Just look for the new coach. So many people do this with marketing. Oh, I hired a marketing company, bad leads, it was terrible. And it's like, well, that doesn't mean that marketing doesn't work. Certainly we know marketing and advertising works. How do you get it to work for your practice? And really you're probably not all that different. It was probably something internal, but maybe it was external. I think my point is always be open to growing and working with other people and realizing that other people are going to do things better than you can. But what is the thing that you can do that no one else can? As a dentist is practicing dentistry. No one else in the practice, unless you have multiple doctors, can do what you do. So I think that's just huge. If you want to grow, you got to get out of your own way. You got to let go of the ego, and it takes a team.
You've got to have the right people around you all the time. It's a cliche, but Tiger Woods had multiple coaches for different parts of his golf game. Roger Federer, the same thing. His box is full of coaches, fitness coach, mind coach, all parts. There's all parts that if coaching was free, everybody would use it. Just like if hygiene visits were free, people would go far more often than they do, because it feels good and it's good for you. Ultimately, without being confused, the only thing about not having a coach is having too many coaches, or trying to do it yourself and then trawling through the internet and taking a bit of here and a bit of that, and you end up, with a dog that's got 5 lines of heritage and 5 different parts. In fact, we met a lady the other day at a hotel. We said that you've got a Springer Spaniel, and she goes, not many people know what a Springer Spaniel is, and we did. And she says a lot of people come up, what's it crossed with? What sort of dog is this, and what's it crossed with? So again, that's an issue. If you find a coach, just do what that coach tells you, and don't confuse yourself, because usually what you'll find is that coach is telling you something, and especially if it's somebody who's done it themselves and done it for other people, they're telling you something that they know works and will work for you. And, in fact, one of my clients said to me, she said, David, sometimes I just say yes and agree with you just to shut you up. And guess what? It always works. Although I am resistant, I know that you're persistent because you know it works. And so I'm learning that it's like the yellow brick road. There is a green line to success. And if you stay on that green line, that's the quickest way to get to success. If you divert from the green line, the coach brings you back. If you try and do it yourself, we've all seen the diagrams. The road to success in reality is a whole pile of squiggles. But if somebody can help you straighten that out and just help the dentist stay away from the shiny objects and just do the things that need to be done, then owning a dental practice is a gift, because if you nurture that gift, it is a financial benefit for you so that you can live where you want, send your children to school where you want, retire where you want to, and do those things in retirement. Whereas if you don't realize that gift, it becomes a struggle.
For those listening, watching that want to learn more, get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to reach out?
Find me on Facebook. I've got a Facebook page that, what you see is what you get. There's no, I'm not scared of people finding who I am or what I'm doing. David Moffet. It's easy to remember. I have to spell for people who can't speak English sometimes. So I say it's MOFF like in French fry, and then ET like the movie. That's the easiest way to remember me. And it's the same on LinkedIn as well. They're the two socials that I use the most. Instagram I use, but I'm still working out why. But I like the way that makes the pictures look, and they go to my Facebook page. I've got a website, theultimatepatientexperience.com. Just reach out for me. Once you find me, make contact. We can have a 20-minute chat about what's going on at your practice and just see if I can help you, or I can steer you to somebody who can help you. I love talking to dentists. Sometimes I find some really interesting models. I go, wow, I never thought of doing it that way. And so I'm always amazed at what opportunities there are in dentistry for dental practice owners and dentists as dental practice owners.
Well, thanks so much for coming on the Grow Ortho podcast. It's good to see you again, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, a pleasure, Luke, and thanks for inviting me back. And it's been fun. I really enjoyed it.
If you enjoyed this video, check this one out on how to improve your new patient calls.